You know what's funny about that? So in the background as it's playing, you can see both of us doing this.
Oh yeah.
We're going. All right, we're back again. Even though we're back again. What's up, people? How's everybody doing? Dano, what's up, man?
Oh, not much. Haven't been shut down or flagged by
No,
YouTube yet. That's cool.
no,
I don't
not
know
shut
what it
down.
takes
Well,
apparently.
I can't monetize these, so that's one thing.
Oh,
You want to know why I can't? It's not even the content. It's because of that freaking theme song at the front. That's the only reason I can't.
what does
That's the only
that
reason.
do?
Because it's a copyright. Because in the description, I didn't give credit to whoever did that piece of 20-second music.
I see.
I'm I'm stealing. So there you go.
That's never happened on the internet before.
So like I haven't been able to monetize a live in like 9 months. So I'm just like, screw it. They don't get enough views anyway to even worry about it. So it's not even worth it. So
Yeah,
whatever. But,
makes sense.
yeah. So. All right. Well, we're back. We're not talking any politics tonight. We're not talking any religion tonight. We are going to talk about the 80s and if it was better then than it is now. And if we wanted a really short show, we would just say yes and hang up. But we'll go into it a little bit further on why we think the 80s was a lot better.
Well, I can promise to not talk about politics. The second half, what you say, I can't promise that because it actually kind of ties in.
Oh, true. Okay.
So
True. So
still deal.
let's get into it. So let's go over a few different things. Like let's go over because obviously Dan and I are both born in the 80s, right? I was born in 80, Dan was born in 84. So let's go over like movies, music, like TV, and like toys. We're gonna actually talk about toys on my toy channel tonight.
Hey, shocker. I mean,
So
yeah.
what do you want to start with? You want to start with like we'll start with a hard one. We'll start with music. Actually, it's not that hard because that's really easy. But what do you think was better? So what do you think was better about music in the 80s than now? Or even like the 90s and the 2000s? What do you think the 80s why was the 80s more special time than like the 90s, 2000s and well, now?
Well, music. I mean, that's let's just say 80s, 90s, just because that's like our childhood into our
Yeah,
teens.
yeah.
Like there was less technology with music,
Yeah.
so what I mean by that is like you actually had to have. Actually, not to say that there aren't musicians today that have talent. I think they're few and far between. But back then, you actually had to have talent. There weren't as many ways to cover it up, if you will. Um, like Rob Zombie said, he's like, boy, you could record music in a bathroom and they could edit it and make it sound good nowadays.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
you couldn't do that in the 80s or 90s.
No. No.
And so you could do a little, I'm sure, but you know, you had to actually have that raw, natural, God-given talent.
Mhm.
For the most part, or you look at someone like Michael Jackson, for example, like the array of talents he had, not only his dancing and choreography, but his ability to write and perform music, and then even like into his music videos themselves. I mean, it's like
Mhm.
holy, like he's just the broad spectrum that he was able to kind of get his hands in everything, all these different mediums of creativity like that. I mean, even guys like Prince, and but then you can go into like heavy metal, like Metallica. Like, I think the '80s were the best decade for Metallica, for example. Like Master of
Yeah.
Puppets is probably
Yeah.
their best album, but just the sheer writing of a lot of that music. There's a million examples if you're talking '80s, especially with music.
Yeah,
So,
there is. There
but
is.
but to answer the question, I think the main thing is just that there was more reliance on talent as opposed to technology or marketing, PR, or like nowadays, if the music industry wants a specific person, they'll make it work with them. It doesn't matter if they have talent or not. Like if they have a certain look or whatever they're trying to promote, they'll focus on that and then they'll use auto tune or whatever they have, to cover up the lack of talent. Well, they didn't have to do that in the '80s.
Right.
So
No. Well, and the other thing that was funny about the 80s when it came to music, it's like some of the biggest selling records of all time came from the 80s, like Thriller, like the Black
Yeah.
album was 91, but still we'll call that, you know. You had all these records that I mean, I think Thriller is still number 1 of all time. It was between them and like Chicago's greatest hits or something like that, or the
Or
Eagles.
I think maybe like the Eagles or
Yeah, I think it
somebody
was the
had
Eagles or
one.
somebody like that. So
Yeah.
it's like no one's touched that since then. But
And
why?
they
You know,
well,
why?
it's also different with how it's done, of course, because now you have things like Spotify and streaming and
Yeah.
well, the internet as a whole. So I mean,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
just to sell like millions and millions of like hard copy, like just albums, like records, or then like cassette tapes or CDs. I mean that's just insane to me. Like,
Yeah.
you
Well, it
know,
is because again, like you said, you have a good point where the internet and all the streaming and all that is good in some aspects, but it's also really bad in other aspects because now it's like you got it wherever you want it. I mean, I can go on YouTube right now and listen to the entire Black album if I want without going to buy it. I can go listen to all the Thriller right now without going to buy it. I don't have to go buy the damn thing to listen to it. And back in the 80s, what did I have to do? Well, I had to either sit on the radio all damn day and hope that they play Thriller, or I went and bought the album. There was no other way to do it, you know.
well,
So,
but that was what was cool is like the idea
oh
of
yeah,
getting
yeah,
that album. Like you would actually have to go to like say a mall,
right,
and you
right,
would go to a record store, like you know, I mean,
yeah,
that in itself was like part of it. I
yeah.
think now it's like, to your point, it's all at, as I always say, convenience is like the biggest business of all. It's like, oh, like you just said, I can go on YouTube or I can go on this or that on the internet and I can just listen to whatever song. And I don't know. I think that almost like hurts like the appreciation for it too, in a way.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
like, how
Yeah,
many times, like in the 90s, would you and Gilbert, for example, you would go to like a record store and get like Ride the Lightning on cassette or
yeah,
something like that. Or,
yeah,
mom and dad had like the literal vinyl album of like Thriller or um, Bad,
yeah.
or whoever it may have been. Like, I don't know. I just think there was something a lot cooler to that than just, oh, I can just go on YouTube or I can go on
No, I
whatever.
totally agree. I totally
So,
agree. I think that was way cooler, and I think that there was something, you know, I did when I was a kid. Went to the mall. You know, malls in Colorado are basically non-existent now. In Oklahoma, it's a different story. We have malls that look like they still. It looks like it's still in the 80s here. It hasn't died here, but it's died
I,
in Colorado.
I remember going
Because
to one. Yeah, that was cool.
yeah, you remember the one I took you to? Yeah, I took you and mom and dad to that mall. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you
it was
felt
just
like,
like a time machine. You know,
right,
got
right.
the big arcade. It's got the. It even. I don't think it has a music store. Maybe it does, but it's got like all the shops you would expect. You know,
Yeah.
it's so that's the thing. But I think the other thing that we need to talk about a little bit with this is the talent pool. So the talent pool seemed way deeper and way bigger in the 80s than it does now. Now it's like we're focused on one person that completely sucks and that's it. And then everybody else, you know, everybody else what people consider good music nowadays, they either got their mind wiped from the 80s or they weren't alive in the 80s because there's no way the talent pool could be so dried up. Why do you think that there was so much more talent in the 80s than there is now?
Well, I think like you're like if you're looking at music talent back in the 80s, like you had to have talent. I mean, you okay, like you can have charisma. Like obviously that's something maybe as a musician, especially if like you were like, in like pop. Like if you're in metal, you don't necessarily have to have like the charisma. But um because I think, and I don't know, but I think, even go back to the 60s and 70s. Well, hell, go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s. Look at guys like Elvis Presley, all these guys. There was no other like extra thing that they were looking for. It's like it was purely on, hey, can you play an instrument? Hey, can you be a band? Hey, can you sing? They were propping up the right people, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say, because there was a standard. Now it's like that standard is maybe their look, maybe they have charisma. Hey, can we market this person? um, there's the talent is like the afterthought. It's like with Hollywood, and we'll get into this, but with movies, the writing and the direction and the cinematography is an afterthought. There's other things that are the emphasis now. And the reason that people now think that these musicians, I use the term loosely, are good is because these people, a lot of people, Gen Z, even millennials on down, don't know what actual talent is. So they don't know. They don't know that the individual and extra individuals you're maybe speaking of now, they don't know that they're talentless hacks because they don't know what true talent actually is.
Right.
You at Gen Z, have they listened to, say, someone like Elvis Presley? Have they listened to someone, like Michael Jackson? Have they listened to someone like Prince? Have they listened to any of these 70s or 80s metal bands? Like, probably not. I mean, because like that was all about talent. Like you had to have talent back then, but now it's just talent's like, oh yeah, it's like the afterthought.
Oh, totally.
And
Well, and it's more about money. It's
that
more about
too.
money.
Yep.
And
Well, yeah. How can we market this person
right.
to make more money? Like they can fill in the gaps where the talent's missing through technology, and they're actually looking for that. Like, oh, they can't sing for anything. It's like, doesn't matter.
No, because we'll overproduce it. And then when they get to the concert, they've already paid their money, and sure they suck, but we've already got your money, so who cares?
Right. Like
it's like Disturbed. Disturbed is one of the most overly produced bands of all time. You hear them on record, they sound great. You hear them live, it's like, but did you replace these guys? Where did they? It's crap. Like what happened?
Well, and that's not to say like in the 80s or 90s that they didn't like lip sync and use things like that on occasion. Like I think Michael Jackson had done that, like Madonna or whoever had done that.
Yeah. Milli Vanilli, hey, who can forget them?
yeah. But like, there was still talent there. I mean, there's a variety of reasons they could have done that. Maybe you get a long world tour, like maybe their voice is blown out, or maybe they're just not getting it that night. I mean, there were reasons, but now it's just like automatic, where it's like it's just it's automatic. Like I don't know. It's just really depressing because I don't think a lot of people nowadays know what like real music is. It doesn't matter the genre.
Well, I think that's kind of a responsibility that we have, now. My kids love the 80s music. That's all they'll listen to.
As they should.
My daughter's so obsessed with Michael Jackson, that's literally the only person she wants to listen to. That's it. They'll sing and dance downstairs to only 80s music. That's all they want to listen to. So it's like, I think you kind of need to pay it forward to the younger generation. Be like, quit listening to Taylor Swift's stupid ass and listen to something good, because it's like you're being. Well, the other problem too. This did happen a little bit in the 80s, but a lot of it's got cryptic meanings in it. These people get up and we're going to get political for a second. It's like we talked about a few episodes ago. Taylor Swift endorsed a certain someone, so then, oh my gosh, there's 500,000 new registered voters that are going to do the same thing. And it's like, that wasn't really, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that was really a thing back then. I don't think musicians that go out and, man, I don't remember. I was a kid, and you were too, but I don't remember that being such a big deal, like the celebrity endorsement for things other than like Pepsi and stuff like that,
I think you're right. I mean, like, here's the thing, like you could have a musician in the 80s or 90s like perform at, say, like a presidential inauguration. But it didn't matter who it was. Like they weren't making a statement. It was just a musical performance.
Right.
Like that part of it wasn't political. It's just they're there to perform, or you could see a musician go meet a Democrat president, but then they would also go meet a Republican president. Like it's neutral. They'll perform for anybody because they're a musician, which is their job. Their job isn't to get political. And I think that's what you see nowadays too, is like they find people that they can use and manipulate and puppeteer, if you will, to get, like you just said, the cryptic message, or even like, cryptic lyrics, and people that they can use to push whatever agenda, because that's what the music industry has become, more and more, just like
Yeah.
Oh, I say Hollywood, but it's all Hollywood. But you know,
Yep. Yep.
and that's unfortunate because again, the music is like literally the last bullet point. It's everything else that's the priority.
Right, right. Well, and
So,
the other bad thing of music, I mean, music's become so much more like satanic now than it ever was
well,
in the
pushing
80s.
an
A lot of
agenda.
people used to say, well, if you put Ozzy Osbourne and you play it backward, it's like Satan's talking to you. But like now it's straight up in your face. You know, you see some of these clowns and the shows they do, and it's
Yeah.
like it's a freaking satanic ritual. And I've pretty much banned my kids from watching most stuff when it comes to stuff nowadays. I'd rather have them watch the old stuff. It's like go watch Inspector Gadget. Don't be watching. You can't watch new stuff.
Right.
You can't watch Paw Patrol. You can't watch this. You can't watch that because they suck it in there. They slide it in there, and it's like this subliminal messaging. And that was never a thing in the '80s. We could watch Sesame Street without having mom and dad having to worry about if they were talking about LGBTQ XYZ 123 or any of that crap. It wasn't a thing back then, and it's like it
Well, I
just
mean, like
it's
you could
annoying.
say like you said mentioned like Ozzy Osbourne, like yeah, maybe with that and stuff, like it's like darker, whatever. But that was rock. Hard rock and
Yeah,
metal has always had like that dark association, most of it. But now it's just the genre is irrelevant. It's just like
yeah,
the TV, like you just said, children's shows, like movies. It doesn't have to be like a metal band or an R-rated movie to have some sort of creepy agenda. No, it's G cartoons that have an agenda,
yeah.
or um, or something like that. And Dad just texted me. He wanted me to mention that the Bee Gees he thought were the best as far as music goes.
Yeah,
But
shocking.
again, you compare that to nowadays music. It's like,
Oh
of
yeah.
course, the Bee Gees, the
Well,
talent
and
is
the
off the
talent
charts.
was
Yeah.
just so. I mean, the Bee Gees helped get my son through potty training. So yes, I totally
There
get
you
it.
go. Imagine him trying to potty train with listening to Taylor Swift. I mean,
Well, he'd be having explosive diarrhea if that was the case. So.
right. Well, I mean, it would work. Yeah.
So I think we agree that the music in the '80s was better, right?
Oh, hands down. So a lot of people like '90s music, but I think that's where it started to drop off for
No,
me.
I
But
disagree with that.
but
Boy
still,
bands
compared to
killed it,
now,
man.
like,
Yeah.
well, you got into like the grunge and stuff like
Oh, good.
Nirvana and
That is
you
not
know
good either. Like
that
that's almost as bad as nowadays.
it was like like I never understood. I think a lot of that's overrated. It's not to say that a lot of those bands in the '90s or musicians in the '90s didn't have talent. I think they had it more, but that's just personal preference, probably. Like I'm so particular in music,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I do know that the '80s was '70s and '80s. Well, hell, again, '50s, '60s, '70s, '80s were like that's like the golden era
Yeah.
for
Yep.
music for sure,
Yep.
hands down.
Yep.
So
All right, let's talk about. Okay, this one might be a little harder for us because we probably have to look more in the '90s, but we could probably look a little bit in the '80s, but like TV shows. So, what TV shows do you remember in the '80s really that you really loved?
I mean cartoons, but you're talking like live action, like
Well, any cartoons can go to cartoons, live action, all
well,
that
like
stuff.
I mean, we watched, like Transformers and like the Ninja
Hmm.
Turtles cartoon and Ghostbusters cartoon and stuff like that. Even in like the early '90s, you would have stuff like as a kid like TGIF, right?
Hmm.
Like you would have, freaking Urkel and
Right, right, right. Uh, uh, now,
you would
little
have,
Michelle, you did. The Full
yeah,
House.
yeah.
They'd always have the
Yeah, they're
yeah,
like the sad violin music, like, oh,
yeah.
Michelle, you murdered somebody. Here's why that was
it's
wrong.
it's
Uh,
okay as long as you learned your lesson.
yeah, but uh, but if if you're talking even like shows like in the early '90s, like with TGIF, for example, like Family Matters, right? Like there, it was like at Full House stuff like that. Yeah, it's cheesy and hokey, but at least there was some substance. Like there was that lesson, right? But it wasn't pushing an agenda. It was just common
Right.
sense based, like
Yeah.
lessons.
Yeah.
Like there was a point to it. There's a good lesson learned that you don't have. It doesn't prescribe to any specific belief, but it's just like common sense. Like, hey, little Michelle, you shouldn't lie. Like
Right.
at least
Right.
there's something there. you know, but there's actual comedy too, and there's funny characters, and there's good writing, and um, what I liked about like those shows, as cheesy as they were, like even something like Step by Step. I mean, like all those shows at that era, they would take episodes and have a focal point on each character.
Mm-hmm.
So they would kind of get their own episode, and like where you like there's like actual good writing where they're developing the character, and they would make all of them sympathetic to some extent.
Right.
And like so there was a point to it. Like I think that's, you know, like when we were kids, we just thought it was funny, all those shows, or the cartoons were fun, but now you can think back and be like, no, there was some substance to these things.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I think nowadays, again, you don't really you don't really have that.
There's
But there's
nothing.
no agenda. There's no political
No.
garbage. And also, what was great about the shows back then in like the 90s, even something like Seinfeld, where Seinfeld took no stance on anything. It made fun of everything.
Yep.
You know, I don't like Friends, but I think it kind of did the same thing. I mean, even shows like Wings. I mean, do you remember Wings? Like
LOL.
that was like
Who doesn't
like,
love
that was
LOL?
funny.
Come on.
Yeah, like there were so many shows in the 90s
Yeah.
that you could name. I mean, gosh, I wouldn't even. But all of them had that same formula where it's like, okay, we're writing really good characters, whether it's more family oriented, like Family Matters would have been, for example. But then, like, even like if you go to the 70s where you had like All in the Family, you had shows like that where they're hardcore making fun of everybody. But you have white people making fun of black people. You have black people making fun of white people. You have Democrats making fun of Republicans, making fun of themselves. Like that to me was the golden era because everyone had a sense of humor with all these TV shows. So no one's offended. No one's pushing an agenda.
No one cared. No one was trying to get these shows taken off the air. They thought it was fun. You know, everybody. It's like, I mean, we could even go even more recent, like Dave Chappelle. I was watching Dave Chappelle the other day. You remember when Dave Chappelle was the biggest member of the white supremacists?
Yeah. And he was blind and he didn't know he was black.
He's blind, and he's telling everybody the N-word, and he's all, well, why'd you divorce your wife? He's all, because I found out she was a lover, so I divorced my wife, and he's black. And it's like, that's hilarious. That was only like 15 years ago, you know?
Yeah, really.
And it's like,
yeah.
So,
but that just shows you how it's dropped off.
Like, it's dropped off so badly. You know, I remember so many shows. I'll name off some that you probably remember. So, like Knight Rider. Knight Rider was awesome.
Oh,
Knight Rider was so cool. I remember I had the car. You remember the car I had in Kit, and you put David Hasselhoff in. Okay, you have that. Yeah, the A-Team. The A-Team was awesome. Great show. Fantastic show. Do you remember Sledgehammer, where the guy talked to his gun?
Yeah.
Where he had a
44 mag he had?
Yeah, he had a 44 mag. Yeah. Grandpa loved that show too. He always, you know, loved Sledgehammer. And then you had, you know, you had like Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs was a phenomenal show.
Not the Mama.
Not the Mama. Yeah, Jim Henson stuff. And you had, I could go on forever. Like Seinfeld. I mean, Seinfeld's mine and Dan and my wife's favorite show ever. Best show ever. Like it's not even close. Right. So, and it was just so witty and so clever. And it's like, I watched the thing with Jerry Seinfeld the other day. He's like, you remember the marine biologist when he has to go and pull the golf ball out of the whale's thing? He was telling the story. He's like, well, we've got this thing and we're going to shoot the ending scene tomorrow night, but we don't have this thing. So, you know, they're sitting there, him and Larry David are coming up with it, and they come up with this thing. And it's like, Jason Alexander had one take to do it, and he nailed it flawlessly. And it's like, no one could do that nowadays. No one could be that creative and be that funny to have a quick, you know, 2-minute monologue of where he pulls the ball out of the whale's blowhole and saves the whale from dying, and then gets rejected by the girl because he lied about being a marine biologist. I mean, come on. So I think, you know, TV, much like music, I think it's, again, it's I can't name you 3 TV shows that are on right now. I watch wrestling, I watch baseball when it's on, and I watch The Office and Seinfeld. That's about it.
Yeah, same here.
You know, and kids crap. But it's like, I cannot name you a show now that I would even watch on like network TV.
No, I can't either. Oh, because I literally can't name one.
Yeah. And it's like, well, they've made TV shows about Lucifer, like making Lucifer a good guy. It's like, what the freaking hell, you know? And then they've got these other shows where there's like demons and all this crap, and it's like, this is crap. What is this stuff? And what they'll do is they'll do all these spin-offs. So one show did really good, so let's do a spin-off. Let's do a spin-off on the guy who held the lights for it. Hell, that's a good idea. Again, there's no creativity. There's no originality at all. It's all
Well, no, I mean, like, look at like the 80s and 90s sitcoms, like how they all followed that kind of same formula. Remember Perfect Strangers?
oh yeah,
Colson Laddie Appleton.
fantastic show, fantastic show.
Like, I mean, the premise of that, like, oh, he goes and lives with the guy he was, what was it, in New York, I think?
Yeah, and the guy, where was
And
Balky from? He was from where the hell was it? It was a
I
made
don't
up
like it.
country. Remember, it was
Yeah,
like,
he used to always say it. I can't remember.
yeah, yeah,
But like the premise was so basic, but it was like, and that's with all these shows, like they were very basic premises
yeah,
because the writing was good. And
right,
like they would get all these characters, even like Night Court or something. Like they would have these funny characters that are they're relatable, but they're a little bit exaggerated. But like they would get on all these like ridiculous situations, like situations that they would be in Seinfeld were
that
just,
was ridiculous. Yeah,
I mean, the brilliance. I mean, Larry David's kind of he is a psycho. Let's be honest, but like the guy's brain for comedy is off the charts. Like
right, right. Well,
because
even
it was about being funny. Like Jerry Seinfeld, to your point earlier, would always just every interview where he talks about the show was like, "Is it funny? Is it funny? Is it funny?" That's
because
all
that's
he
all
was
they cared
focused
about.
on.
That was the focus. Is it funny? Wasn't about ratings. I mean, if you guys don't know this, Jerry Seinfeld was offered a new deal for a ton of money back in '98 to keep the show going. He said no. He's like, we've tapped out. This is,
Yeah,
if we
it
keep
ran
doing
its
it,
course.
we're going to turn into corporate stooges that are just doing it for the money. And they made a lot of money for back then, but he bowed out. He's like, it's run its course. It's done. He could have sat there and taken the, hundred millions of dollars they offered him and kept writing shows that turned into crap, but he didn't. He had more respect for himself than that. And he's like, okay, we're good. We're done. We've gone as far as we can go. But now it's like, no, I just want the money. It's all about the
Oh,
money. And
yes.
it's like,
Well,
there's
and
no
that's the problem.
integrity at all. I think that's the,
No, and I think that's one of the other huge issues. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I think like that's not to say there weren't cash grabs, like say with 80s musicians, for example, but a lot of them were just doing what they loved as far as like their talent goes, and then the cash flowed in after that, but it wasn't
right,
necessarily their main motivator.
right,
You know what I mean? So the motivation was to put out a good record, to record good songs, to connect with fans, to do all that, and then the payday came with it. But nowadays it's like, oh, we can make money off this person, so let's try to add talent where we can. And
right,
it's just all flipped on its head.
right,
And movies are no different. TV shows are no different. So I think actually, now that we talk about it, I think the main difference is the motivation.
right,
Yeah,
right.
the motivation's completely different. And it's like, oh, if I can get famous enough, I can make a lot of money.
Well, it's like you notice with sports. What happens every time somebody signs a big contract?
I don't know.
Okay,
That's Dak
let's.
Prescott. That
I was just gonna say Dak Prescott. Look at Dak Prescott. Hell, that wants all this money. What happens to him? Well, he's terrible. He hurts himself. Done for the year. It happens every time. Every time they
yeah,
get
oh
this
yeah,
big
he's
contract.
the first. He's on
Yeah,
a long list
yeah, just
of people
bust.
that's happened with it, and the
Right.
sports are relevant, baseball, football, you
Yep.
name it.
Yep.
So, but
It's just,
again, I look at sports in the 80s and 90s. I mean, um,
well, that's,
look at the
yeah.
look at the
Look at
football players in
football.
like what's that,
Look at football.
dude? I mean, look at hockey, for example. They didn't even start wearing goalie masks, or yeah, goalies didn't wear masks till like the 60s. So those dudes were out there in like the 50s and stuff, just
Bouncing
almost
off their
completely
face.
exposed, getting beat to hell just because they were competitive and wanted to win at the
Yeah.
sport. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, that's not to say that guys don't do that now, but when you're hearing like, oh, this guy's, look at how flashy a lot of the players are. Like, they're more about like being charismatic and like edgy, like in their press conferences and like wearing this ridiculous
Mhm.
clothing, as opposed to everything's like at the forefront except for the football. You know what I mean? It's
Well,
the same formula again.
not only that, they've gotten
Well,
soft.
Joe
So
Namath was flashy. We'll say that, but
you know who I blame for all of it? Deion Sanders. That's who I blame for all of it. He started all that crap.
which is funny because he's really not flashy now.
Yes, he is. He still
But
is.
not like
But
he was, man.
not like he
He's
was.
definitely been
But
humbled.
um,
But
like you take the NFL now, like they've made so many changes to the NFL from what they did. So like back in the 80s, we grew up watching John Elway and Marino and Montana and all those guys, right? Football was hardcore. Like you got called for a
they were
penalty for
tough.
almost nothing. You could go over the middle and smash a guy and not be, oh, it's a penalty,
Yeah.
all this crap. They actually were tough guys. The amount of injuries that happen nowadays is the player's own damn fault because they bargained for a collective bargaining agreement where didn't have to practice so much. They didn't have to show up for all these practices. They didn't have to show up for the OTAs and for the spring practices and all that. And now they don't want to do preseason. The whole point of preseason is to get you back in the playing ways. You
Well, the
remember
best way to get into football shape is
to play football.
So, like
But
with anything,
it's true. It's like you got all these little shits that run around and they're like, well, I need to get paid. And it's not even about how good you are. It's about, okay, well, I have a contract up. This guy's making 50 million a year. That's the market. So I need to make 50 million and 1 penny so that I'm on the top.
right?
That's all it's about.
Right.
It's not even about playing football.
It,
And they
well,
act like
you
these
notice,
guys are so good. These guys would get absolutely destroyed if they played back in the 80s.
well, look at how much smaller the players are now.
Oh, they're twerps now.
Like I was watching the Broncos on Sunday, and I'm just looking at a lot of these receivers and all these players.
Yeah, they're little.
Man, it's like, do these guys go to the gym? I'm sure
Right.
they do.
Well,
But
and you wonder why they get hurt so often.
yeah,
They're not conditioned properly.
No.
It's like you look at wrestling too. Like I'm bigger than Dominic Mysterio.
Well, I mean,
there,
there are guys that are small in wrestling, but man, I mean, well,
but it's not like it used to
steroids
be.
are illegal, so that helped.
That's true. It's not like he used to be with Hulk Hogan and with the Ultimate Warrior.
Right, and that's actually a good one to dive into is just wrestling. Like in the 80s and into the 90s, the steroid, I guess you could call it epidemic within the sport itself. Thank you, Vince McMahon, whether you deny it, whether he admits it or not.
It's all him.
Was the steroids, and I would say that's one area. Okay, now it's better than it was in the 80s and 90s because it's clean in that sense, or they at least WWE, or so they say. And yeah, the wrestlers aren't as big, but it's because they're not juicing.
True.
They're actually hitting the gym. They're actually in ring shape. I mean, and to their credit, you can have, say, I'll use what I thought was a really good feud. It was like, look at Drew McIntyre, big guy, naturally big guy against CM Punk, who wasn't as big, but the guys, they're both so talented as far as like in ring, but also their promo skills and just they're talented across the board. And there's no BS with that, such as steroids, no nonsense with it. It's just like actual two talented guys using all their talents and management allowing them to use their talents. Unlike Vince McMahon, who's like, get juiced. You're not big enough. You need to have a certain body type, and then everything's just kind of corrupt behind the scenes. Like in the later 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. So now wrestling's gotten better than back then, I would say.
Well, that's because too, you have a guy who's gone through it. You have a guy who went through all that crap. Triple H went through all that stuff. So he saw all that crap.
And he used to juice as well.
Triple H used to juice too. Well, and your point's very good because this is one of those things where you can flip it on the head. And I would say wrestling is better now than it was in the 80s for all those reasons.
I think so.
Not only that, it's like they started recording 2 Raws at once. Well, they'll do one live and then they'll tape one. Triple H is doing all these tapings now to give all these guys and girls the holidays off. So they got Thanksgiving off, they got Christmas. He gives them all this more time. And when TKO bought it, they said they were going to do that too. So I'm not a huge fan of The Rock, but he's part of that too, where they're like, okay, we've been through this. We know what it's like to be on the road for 250 friggin' days a year. So we're going to record some stuff. We're going to not always do as many live shows as we used to. And,
and Vince,
that's the thing too.
Vince
didn't give a shit. Vince is like, just work him to death.
300 days a year or whatever. And
Yeah.
And then like it's just way better now, like wrestling than it was back then. I mean, like, yeah, okay, you had a lot of iconic wrestlers, like you said. You had Hulk Hogan, and I don't care if people agree or not, but Jim Hacksaw Duggan, and you had like, yeah, I mean, Macho Man, Randy Savage. Like, there was a lot of iconic wrestlers back then. But the downside is, with the exception of Hulk Hogan and maybe a few others now, most of those guys are dead because of those steroids.
Yeah, yeah. And
Like,
that's one area too where I think the talent's actually better now. Those guys could have never done what a lot of these guys do now. I'm not the biggest fan
right.
of Ricochet, but could you imagine Hulk Hogan or even some of the smaller guys doing what Ricochet does, or doing what Chad Gable does, or doing what I mean, look at Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins is one of the greatest technical wrestlers ever. I mean,
he's great. Well, even look at some of the bigger guys now.
yeah.
They're doing moves off
Bronson
the
Reed.
ropes.
Bronson Reed's a complete
Yeah,
freak.
Bronson Reed's insane. Yeah,
No one could ever do what he does at 340 pounds back in the day.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like it's weird. Like, wrestling's the one. It's interesting we brought this up. It's like an anomaly as far as what we're talking about, because it's the one that's backwards from everything else. Where Hulk Hogan, he had a couple good things in Japan that I've seen videos of, but you look at it, the guy's not a talented wrestler.
Not at all.
He did this. He did this.
Stiff as hell.
He did his leg drop. He did his big boot, which wouldn't hurt a fly. He had
and he pointed at the guy.
yeah. Like, he had like 4 moves, but people ate it up because he was so charismatic, and he's very all-American guy. Which, okay, yeah. But now it's like he doesn't hold a candle wrestling-wise.
No.
To say someone like Seth Rollins. I know a lot of people probably wouldn't like me saying that, or even Roman Reigns, or but you look at someone like, I hate to jump ship to that company, but someone like Daniel Bryan, for example, or Bryan Danielson, I should say. The guy could wrestle circles around Hulk Hogan. Like, it's not even it's not even on the same planet. But people back in the 80s and 90s, they ate up Hulk Hogan, because I think at that point, with the way that wrestling transformed, I mean, Dusty Rhodes was a huge part of the 70s and stuff too. Like, he built most of that too. But people back then, because it was new, they didn't, compared to now, they didn't know. Right. Like, you see a wrestler now, you're like, oh my gosh, the talent level's way better. Yeah. So it's interesting how wrestling's the one thing it's flipped, where it's actually better now.
Which is weird.
Well, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, mid 90s, yeah, you had talent, but it was the charisma that people they were charismatic. It was the promos. Dusty Rhodes was good in the ring, but people loved the guy's promos. The guy's a charisma machine. Ric Flair. I mean, it's flipped. So that's interesting with wrestling. We can move on to another one, but
one more thing though. But it's like now, it's like, especially with WWE, AEW's crap, but with WWE, like the storytelling, like it's this long, something Vince could never do, because he would have a feud go on for a couple months and then it'd be done, except for Austin and Triple H that went on for a while. But like, you look at the bloodline thing, they would have never done something. This is like a 4-year story running on that's gone this entire time. Yeah, it would have never happened back in the day, because it was more about Hulk Hogan going out and doing his thing than an actual story. And it's like every Friday night or every Monday when you see the bloodline thing, it's like, it just keeps getting better and better, and they keep adding to the story. So it's almost like, like a network TV show that you've been watching, that's like, okay, season 4 of the bloodline and this. So in that aspect too, I think it brings you back, instead of, just going with the kind of the dummy muscle guy doing this all the time, or running as fast as he can down. It's more about, I want to be invested in the story, as opposed of, oh, I want to see him do this, or I want to see him do that,
Well, because that's how you keep kayfabe alive, by everyone knows it's a story and they're actors, but we don't tell the crowd that as much as we can. Like, and to your other point, like, back then, it's the Mick Foley idea that cheap pops. Like, okay, Hulk, you have to hook up every match. You have to do this every match. You do your 4 bullet points. Well, now you have, like you said, this deep delve into character work and storytelling. And yes, there's still some cheap pops, of course, but not Like,
Not
oh,
as
I mean,
much
yeah,
though.
Roman Reigns, every time he's in a match, yes, he's going to do the Superman punch. Yes, he's going to
Yeah.
go, ooh, ah, like, yeah.
Right.
But he's not one dimensional in that sense. Like,
No, he's
he can
actually
do
a
a lot
pretty
of
good
other
actor.
things.
Roman's actually a pretty good actor.
He's gotten a lot better.
You know,
So,
I mean,
but,
he used to be terrible, but he's really good now.
well,
And
that was
it's like,
Vince McMahon.
well, of
I
course,
would
because
say.
you know what's funny about that? Every person that leaves the company and then comes back, they ask him why they come back. Ah, change your management.
Yeah.
Change your management.
Well,
Change
imagine,
your
like,
management.
I know you don't like him a lot, but imagine CM Punk, like, do you think he would have come back if Vince was there?
Absolutely not. There's
No,
no
and
way.
I'm actually glad he came back because since he has, I've loved everything he's done. That's
I don't like him as a person, but as a wrestler, yeah, he's
what,
fine.
but that's where, like, again, kayfabe. It's like
Kayfabe,
you're
right.
not watching Phil Brooks, you're watching CM Punk. You know,
Even though Phil Brooks is CM Punk.
he pretty much is, but well,
That's the
like,
problem with that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, in that aspect with the TV shows, I think it's almost kind of split because you know you have. I'm glad we went down this road. Wrestling is the one exception where it's
Mhm.
not better. It is better now than it was in the '80s, but I think for everything else, you know, I mean, you like you said, you look at sports, you look at baseball. You know, Nolan Ryan was throwing
250 pitches or whatever.
250 pitches, and they're like, and he's like, he had blood dripping down. You know, Kurt Schilling had the bloody sock. He's still in there.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
they limit a pitch count to like 50 guys, and they're
I
telling you to speed
eight
it.
Tommy John surgeries because they threw 12
Right, you
pitches.
know,
You know, like
it's like, oh my gosh, you know. So,
well,
all right.
that's something from like the 70s and 80s and 90s. Now you look at it, everything. Well, I don't know about hockey. I don't want to say everything, but most things have been kind of. It's not really a real word, but wimpified. Everything's gotten wimpier.
Oh, no doubt.
Everything's coddled.
No doubt.
Like yes, player safety, et cetera, et cetera. But like you look at like I can't watch the NBA now because if you look at LeBron James, he's going to do a flop. He's going to fall on the ground and act like a fish out of water, and it's a foul, and
Right.
it's just like. And now in football, if there's any given play that's a pass, they're all playing for the flag, and it's just like,
yeah.
and like you can't touch the
Well,
quarterback. I mean, it's
when
like
people are
yes.
wondering if the NFL's rigged, that tells you there's something wrong.
Well, I
You
mean,
know.
there's been some good things compared to say the 70s and 80s, like in the 90s, you had a ton of players getting concussions. Just like in wrestling, the concussion protocol, like there was none. So that is one thing where it's improved, like some safety, but it's like anything else, they can take it too far. It's like at some point in the NFL, it's like just put some flags on the guy's waist and make it.
So Tom Brady
football.
said he said it's flag football.
Well, there you go, from the horse's mouth, you know.
And there's a guy that came up in 2000. You know, that's 20 years after what we're talking about. And he even says, he's like, the coaching is not as good. The players are not as good.
They have to tone it down. They can't be.
Yeah.
They can't be going like all like Mike Ditka on them. You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah,
I mean,
because they're
how do you think he was
sensitive.
talking to how do you think he was talking to the players on the '85 Bears? Like, he's probably ripping McMahon a new one. I mean, like
Absolutely.
Mike Singletary. Like, I don't know, like. You know,
they were tough for a reason because he made them tough.
Were they ever guys
man,
with like blood all over their legs and like they're out there and
the one guy that I actually think is like that, who's old school, is guy in your state, Sean Payton. He don't take no crap. He sits there and he rips people apart.
Well, he believes in discipline. Yeah.
Yeah, he believes in discipline. You're not going to be a sissy
there's
being
guys
with
that are
him.
old school that would have fit in the 70s and 80s but the 70s with the NFL, those guys.
If you saw a game in the NFL in the 70s and the guy didn't have blood on, you thought something was wrong.
Well, nowadays, look at what they do with like even the field conditions. Like they don't play like the fields are never muddy anymore. Like the way you know, like everything's so pampered.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like you remember the drive, what Elway looked like after the drive?
Oh, in Cleveland.
Playing in Cleveland, and that Cleveland was like the worst field of all time.
But
Elway's entire side was covered in mud.
But that added to it.
Yeah.
That made it so much more interesting. And these guys they're well-paid athletes, but that's part of it is like, oh, crappy weather. Well, yeah, you're playing in December and January. Of course, there's in Cleveland.
Like, dog bones thrown at them, dog biscuits.
Yeah, well, yeah, the dog pound. Yeah,
like the dog pound.
nowadays you just don't have that kind of thing where
No, no,
there's all these. It's like one collective element, like all these cool things about it. Like everything's just so watered down.
right.
Music's watered down. Movies are watered down. Sports are watered down. It's just like and I don't know what that has to do with. Well, no, let me rephrase that. That definitely has a lot to do with the culture. The '80s culture and the '90s culture was very different than it is now. People were tough. They're thick-skinned. An athlete's not going to probably cry if he's playing in the mud. Like so. Yeah, it all kind of goes hand in hand
It
there.
does. It all goes together. All right, let's talk about movies a little bit because obviously this is an easy one. Uh, you're not going to beat Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back. Predator to me is one of the greatest movies of all time because it's so well done. It's not good acting.
No,
It's
well, Arnold
not, but
Schwarzenegger.
but
Come on.
the effects,
Yeah,
the
I've
practical.
lived in America. I've lived in America longer than I lived in my home country, and my accent's gotten worse, Maria. Like, how's your accent get worse?
That's the
Uh,
worst.
Is it
But it's
maybe
like
forced? Arnold.
you you look at that. The practical effects of that movie are better than anything they could do now.
Oh, don't
And
get me going on practical effects compared to
the
CGI.
way the way that movie looks and the build up and the tension and you're
It's
like the entire first half of the movie you have no idea, well actually three-quarters of the movie you have no idea what they're looking at the entire time.
that's the best part of it
That's what's so
because
great about it.
they're not showing you everything. They're not exploring the predator's childhood to tell you why he is what he is. It's
Why
like
is he ripping people's
that.
skin off? Well,
Yeah,
he was
this
damaged
is
as a kid.
why he wasn't called on in Predator class when he was 4. The reason that movies were better back then, especially an action thriller movie like that or horror, because it can be considered horror, is because of the mystery. The
Yeah,
mystery is what builds your tension, builds your suspense. You don't know things. The mystery is the key.
yeah,
That's why John Carpenter's Halloween works so well because Michael Myers, we don't know
yeah,
anything about him. We don't know why he killed his sister and he's 6. Like, why is he after his people? That's why it's great
yeah.
because you don't know. Like your imagination and your mind is what's actually the thrilling or scary element or the suspenseful element is the question marks.
Yep.
They don't understand that now.
No. Now,
So
now it's about how big can we make the
how
explosion?
big can we make this?
How can we,
Yeah.
what does city we had all those like disaster movies like in the 90s, like Volcano and Deep Impact and all this crap. And it's like how many
Or the
times
worst
can
of the
we
worst, Armageddon. Oh my God.
Ugh,
Pile of trash.
garbage, man.
You know
You
what?
know,
Yeah, that's that stupid Michael Bay. Oh my gosh,
yeah,
one of the worst directors,
no,
in my opinion,
I think he
ever.
gets the worst director for screwing up Transformers. I hate that guy. I can't stand
Well,
his ass.
yeah, I mean, this is why I liked a lot of '80s horror, not all of it, but the story-driven ones,
Yeah,
like Nightmare on Elm Street, like I talked about this a couple weeks ago. But you don't know anything about Freddy Krueger until like the last maybe 10 or 15 minutes, where Nancy's mom's telling her a little bit about him and why he's after them, and it's like the mystery. It's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Like that is so brilliant. Like they could do that in those movies back then,
yeah,
and like even the comedies back then. Look at the storyline in Blues Brothers, for example.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
all the the great story of Dan Aykroyd. He'd never written a movie script before, right? Usually, so the way a movie script works is like one page equals 1 minute of the movie, typically. So you look at 100 to 120, 130 pages. He wrote like a 350 some page script, and because he wrote all these subplots of how they go and get each band member back,
Which is
but
brilliant.
it was expanded upon so much that John Landis, who ended up co-writing it and directing it, he had to consolidate the script by like a third.
Mhm.
But you notice how he still had those subplots of like, well, here's how they got Donald Duck done. Here's how they got Matt Guitar Murphy. They're still in there. But
Yeah.
the story and then like the subplots in there, like you just don't see writing like that. I
No,
mean,
no, no.
sorry, tangent, but I
No,
guess
no, no. You're good
hey,
because you're absolutely right. You don't see story. There's the writings in people. I talked about this back when we were doing Yak with Yukon. It's like you don't know if it's that the I think it's the studios. I don't think that the
It is.
talent pool's dried up
They
completely where
handcuffed
there's no good.
everybody.
Right, they handcuffed everybody. Like, well, you don't have Scarlett Johansson in this, so we're not doing it. Or you don't have New York being blown up 47 times, so we're not doing this. The writing could be fantastic, but if they don't have what they deem to be something that's going to make a huge profit, they're not going to do it.
Right.
It's either got to be a sequel or it's got to be. It's funny that we make such a big deal about sequels because if you go back and you watch the old Siskel and Ebert reviews, they used to bitch about the same thing. They're like, "Oh, gas, another sequel. When are we going to
Right.
get over this?" So it's always been that thing where studio does something good, and then they try to duplicate it, and not 9 times out of 10, except for Star Wars, they screw up the sequel. It's like
Except for
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Terminator.
Terminator, right? Terminator,
Terminator
Star
2 is
Wars,
still one of my top fives.
right? Even if you go higher, like the Matrix Reloaded is way better than the Matrix, you know. And it's like you only have a couple where it actually hit better the second time than it did the first time. But now it's like
Very
what we
rare,
talked
yeah.
about with music and with TV. Nobody gives a shit as long as it's got in your certain. What sense does it make to have Robert Downey Jr. play Iron Man for 15 years and then hey, guess what? Now he's Doctor Doom in the same damn
It's
Marvel.
marketing. It's just
What the hell
marketing.
is that? Is stupid as hell. It's like, why would you
Well,
do that? He's
again,
Iron
it's
Man. Now he's a
well,
bad guy. Like, what?
it's what we said earlier. The motivation's completely different because they know people will see it now because it has
Right.
Robert Downey. And now the people in their mind are like, oh, I want to see Robert Downey Jr. do that role, and I don't even know what it is. They want to see that, and that's why they'll go.
Yeah.
And
And that's what they're
as
banking on. It
opposed to
doesn't.
like, oh my gosh, it's a well-written script and it's a great movie. The editing's great, the soundtrack is great, the writing, the acting, the direction, the cinematography. Nope, that has nothing to do with it.
Well, and they've played that game so much with Star Wars. They think if they put Star Wars on it, it's going to do great. Well, you know what? In the last 12 years since Lucas sold it to them, it's been complete crap. Other than
It
Rogue One.
is.
Rogue One and The
Rogue One
Mandalorian
was great.
season 1 and 2 are the only exceptions. The
Yeah.
rest is complete and utter crap. Now what are they doing? Now they get so much backlash, they're canceling stuff. They just canceled the Ray movie. Hey, guess what? Nobody wants to care about Ray because nobody gives a shit about Ray. Ray's a loser. Go to the back of the line, loser. Nobody cares about you. And it's like that's what these companies don't understand. Nobody cares. Back in the day, they'd listen to you. Well, maybe they wouldn't because they made Critters 1, Critters 2, Critters 3, Critters 4, Critters 5, Critters
Well,
6.
so here's I think you mentioned Ninja Turtles earlier. So
Mhm.
the first movie came out in 1990, I believe.
Yep. Yep.
That movie is still one of my favorite movies there are.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal movie.
But here's what happened with the sequel. So this is when the 90s is when all this kind of
Yep.
cancel culture or whining and all this kind of started in a much more minor way. But so for the sequel to Ninja Turtles, the reason it's not as good, the reason they even changed the look of the Ninja Turtles is because there were parents complaining that the first one was too violent. They didn't like the Ninja Turtles having weapons, even though they always had their weapons, and each turtle has distinct weapons. And so
Right.
if you watch the second one, at some point in the movie, all of the turtles just don't have their weapons anymore.
Right.
And they actually changed the look to make them look nicer, like the way Raphael looks in the first one compared to the second one. It's night and day.
Completely different.
Yep. And then they added like the extra hokiness, like, oh, let's have Vanilla Ice show up and the turtles can break dance and all these cheesy, lame, in my opinion, elements. But if you watch the first one, yeah, there's a little bit of fun to it, but that movie's really serious.
Oh yeah,
That's
totally.
why it's so dang good. Like,
Totally.
but again, enough complaints, and then so they watered down this movie to appease a handful of whiners, and so the movie is just nowhere near the first one. It's like, why?
Well, then it
You
was
know?
rushed out early because the other one did so well.
Yeah.
They rushed
Yeah.
it out. So the second one comes out in 1991. One other thing they did, they took away Shredder's one claw because it was too threatening.
Oh
And
my gosh, I forgot about
he's
that.
freaking Shredder, man. He's Shredder.
Yeah, all
It's
the other
like
blades on him are
all
fine.
the other blades,
The
those
long
aren't
one's
threatening, but the one on
scary.
his hand, oh my gosh. But that's the thing. Why do people got to do that? It's like if you don't like it, don't go see it.
I mean,
It's
but
that damn simple.
but
And
you can apply that logic to any movie, like when we
you
talked
can.
about Terrifier 3. You know what I
You
mean?
can.
You can apply
Yeah.
that, and it does hold true. Um, people spend so much time like picketing or crying about some movie, like you said, like that's not going to normally do anything. Just like maybe move on with your day. There's bigger problems in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
but
But I
that's
think
but that's the thing is like that's where that culture has that impact on
yeah,
things, whether it's movies or music or even, I mean, you look at the NFL in the last 10 years, the culture impact on it.
oh, huge.
And I understand that to an extent, but when you're talking creative things like movies and music, that shouldn't, yeah, you can have cultural, pop culture references, fine, but your motivation needs to be story in movies, and in music, the motivation needs to be good music and things like that. But nowadays, that's not it. And it's sad that even in the early 90s, like we're saying, the motivation was just to appease a few whiny parents for a Ninja Turtles movie.
Yeah.
So it's funny the parallels actually now that we're talking about it, where, okay, maybe we thought the 80s and 90s were better, but it's like, okay, were they? Maybe. In certain
Maybe.
elements, yes, but certain elements,
I mean, it
no.
kind of got the wheels in
No.
motion. It kind of got
Well,
to get
everything has a
things going
starting
where,
point.
right,
Yeah.
right.
And
I
so,
think the '90s is really more to blame for that than the
well,
'80s
you get
because
into that, and then you get into the early 2000s and up
mhm,
into about 2008, 2009, and that's when
yeah, it
you
took
just
a
right
dive.
off the
Yeah,
cliff.
yeah.
But the late 90s, like society was starting to go downhill a little bit. You have garbage like Jerry Springer, and
Hmm.
even WWE at the time was pretty rough, and there was a lot of things where it was very rebellious culture, like with
Yeah.
everything, and um, so yeah, it's funny to talk about this because it's like we can think, oh, this era was better, but it's like, well, maybe some of it, but actually, you start to break it down, you're like, yeah, maybe.
It's true. It's true.
So
There's things that shifted. Well, and not to get political, but that is part of it.
that's a huge
You
part of
look
it.
at some areas of time throughout when things started to shift. You look at 92. Old Slick Willie got in 92, and then there's a little bit of a different culture shock to that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Well, when Obama, this is my
when
opinion, when Obama got
when
elected
somebody's in the office and he's they're questioning if he's having an affair with some
in the Oval Office.
in the Oval Office,
So it's
culture
like,
shock,
yeah, were
culture
things
change.
better? Were
People
things better
start
in the 90s in certain ways? Sure, but there were
right.
other things that weren't so great. But
Right. You look at
no,
things that go on and you look at the way people's mindset changes and they're
right.
like, oh, people are sitting there all of a sudden starting to defend him having some chick in the Oval Office and everything else, So it all goes together. It's not to be political, but if you look at it and break it down, like Dan's saying, you can see where the shift changes. You can see where the mentality of
It
people
well,
changes.
it's a slow burn. I
It's
mean,
slow burn.
it's not just necessarily overnight because there's a little more of one thing, a little more, or we gave someone an inch, a group of people, or this or that, and then they end up taking a mile. It's like
Well, and the
whatever it
burn
may
turned to
be.
an inferno the last 4 years. Society wise, culture wise,
Well,
and everything else. It's a full raging inferno now with what's going on
right,
and the way people think. And then that translates. I mean, look at Disney. Disney is one of the worst, most satanic companies in the entire world because they now have the mindset, oh well, let's just go woke. Let's just it's okay. This is what people want to see. They've been told time and time again, this is what people don't want to see, but they continue to push it. They continue to do it. They don't listen. Back in the 80s, I think they listened a little more. And now
well,
they're just
the
like, screw
the
you, we're going to do
difference,
what we want.
yes, but the differences in the 80s and 90s with Disney, they still had a lot of messed up stuff in their
They did.
movies and stuff, but it was very hidden. But
Right.
now it's just like the motivator in the forefront, um, for all of their shows or whatever. And so it's like they're emboldened and it's like 100 times more in your face. And
Mhm.
so I think that's the other thing is like 80s, 90s, 70s stuff was there, but it was a lot more discreet. It was a lot more hidden. But
Yeah, it
now,
wasn't in
now
your face.
everything is just like floodgates opened,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so with whatever it may be. Um, so in that sense, I think it was better back then.
Well, one good thing
No.
that I think that happens now, so I'll give the now uh, a mulligan here, or I'll give them credit here. is that a lot of people complain that now they focus, like toy companies, for instance, or when they do like those retro arcades, they get blamed. So like, well, you're living, you're using nostalgia as a tool to bring people in. I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think that's a
Well, it's
good thing.
not.
I
It
think it's a
is.
good thing because you look at behind me. Okay, so let's see if I can reach anything here.
Well, like
Um,
all the Transformers that
yeah,
you have that are essentially
yeah.
remakes of the
When I was
'80s
a kid, when
ones.
I was a kid, to have something like this would have been incredible.
Oh,
Because I've
well,
got
they didn't make it
they
to
didn't
look
make it right.
like
I've
that. Yeah.
got this right here that is obviously awesome, but this Megatron when you transform looks like shit, you know. But now technology's caught up so much, and they still use the nostalgia where they're like, okay,
Right.
now we have the technology to catch up with the nostalgia. We can bring you something that looks just like it did in the
Exactly.
cartoon. It doesn't have to be this funny looking thing that, wow, awesome, uh, doesn't really hit the spot. So, toy wise and stuff, I actually think it's better now because not only can you get the stuff you had as a kid, like you guys can see all my Ghostbusters and shit up there, but you can get stuff that's like a modern version of it to look the way it did when you watched the cartoon or you watched the movie when you were a kid.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad about that, but I'm also glad that they do that because it kind of gives like the younger people nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
they get to see that and
Yeah,
like, and they go, well, I know even like your kids do that, like, oh, and they love all those toys that are from
yeah,
when you were their age, and
yeah,
you can like share that with them, like, so that's cool. It kind of bridges things. I mean, that's kind of the importance of like stuff like that, even through like a toy. It's like it's nostalgia for you and me, but it also bridges the gap between for your kids and you. Like you can, it's like they have one foot in the '80s,
yeah.
at least in
Which is yeah,
a small way, which is neat. But it's also funny that anything that's new, like no one can make anything new now, toy whatever wise, that can even hold a candle to the '80s stuff, which is why they're just remaking all the '80s stuff.
right.
That's
You go
also
in the
kind
toy. You go to Target. You
of
go in the toy aisle. So you go to Target. You go in the toy aisle. Okay. So you go. Say you go into Target. You go in there, the first thing you see is Transformers. Right next to that is the G.I. Joe. Right next to that is the Ghostbusters. Right next to that is the Jurassic Park and the Marvel. Right next to that is the Star Wars. Right next to that is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's nothing
'80s
new.
and '90s.
It's all 80s and 90s, like in that where I go to film videos in the action figure aisle. You go in the girls, Barbie, Lego. It's like there is nothing that's come up in the last 30 years that's been able to replace these things. All the kids are doing the same thing and buying the same thing, new updated versions of the same stuff Dan and I had when we were asking for stuff for our birthdays and Christmas from our parents. It's like exactly the same thing.
Mhm.
Now, I think the one problem is, of course, like the theme of this entire live is greed. Now, toy companies see this, Hasbro, dicks. Uh, they, they see this, so what do? They start paying, they start charging outrageous amounts, and then you have to ask yourself, what is the price of nostalgia worth to me? Is it worth $65 for a figure? Or is it something that, you got to make that decision because
Right.
now there's a premium on nostalgia. There's more money in the nostalgia because they know it's going to sell. They can sit there and they can lie, and by they I mean Hasbro. The number one buyers of toys nowadays is guys in their 40s.
I believe that. Yeah.
So it's like there's a reason that this stuff is still around and still catered to because guys like me still buying it, my kids are buying it, and everything else. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, and it's funny because like, and that's with like toys, something
yeah,
that's very mainstream. But I can even give you an example of something that's not mainstream. Like that would be like practical effects. Like you mentioned them earlier, but so me being a sculptor and a whole bunch of people that I know that are sculptors, they're sculpting Jason from Friday the 13th Part 3, from part for. They're sculpting Freddy Krueger from
Right.
Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. I sculpted Pumpkinhead last year. Pumpkinhead came out in what, 87?
Yep.
Um, People are sculpting like traditional, like George Romero style zombies from like the 70s. So my point is, even these people that make monster makers that sculpt masks and props, they're sculpting stuff that Rick Baker sculpted in the 80s when he made
Right.
puppets for these movies, or Jim Henson, like you said. We're even sculpting stuff from then. We're not, there's really nothing, there's a few things new that they sculpt. But most of the stuff that you see at a trade show where people are making props, it's all like flashback to like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
So even in that, in the 90s, even in that, oh, they're sculpting, stuff from way back when.
Yep.
They're trying to make puppets like Rick Baker would have made for like, night American Werewolf in London, or whatever movie it may have been. It's even in that.
Yeah.
Like there's like it's insane how all of that works. Everyone is like, that's like it's the age, I don't know, but maybe it's our way of like having one foot back in our
Oh yeah.
teens and
Oh,
childhood.
absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
I think everybody does that to some extent, because you remember a lot of it for a lot of good things.
It just seems like
So,
it's more prevalent now than
well,
it like.
it,
I'd have to ask mom and dad. That'd be a good thing to ask mom and dad. Be like, dude, is there anything that they see from way back then that they still, you know, I mean, maybe dad's hair. I don't know, you know, when he had the big fro or something. I don't know, but it's like it seems like it's more of our generation looking back to the 80s than like any other generation before. I don't know if, people that were, our age in the 70s, were they looking back to the 50s that much? Were they people
I
that were
don't.
in the
I
50s, were they looking back to the 30s,
here.
you know?
Here's the thing. If I had to guess, I doubt it, because each start in the 50s, go from the 50s through the I would say mid to late 90s. Every decade has its distinct music and
Hmm.
movies, distinct
Hmm.
styles, hairstyles, clothing styles, even how people talked,
Yep.
slang words, whatever, vehicles, um, color palettes within the houses. Mom and I were talking about that earlier. The 50s, you got those big Cadillacs. You've got what, Elvis Presley. You've got the distinct dress styles, like in Back to the Future when Michael J. Fox goes back in time into the 50s.
Hmm.
There's that distinct style, the distinct musical style, the distinct dress style. The 60s is the same thing. It's very distinct. The 70s is the same thing. It's very, very distinct. The 80s, very, very distinct. The Michael Jackson Jerry curl. The music is very distinct. Like the 90s is very distinct. Then you get in the 2000s, up until now, it's all a melting pot. Now your clothing distinct style is going to Walmart and seeing people looking like slobs in their pajamas. That's all I
Right.
see. And like there's no distinct styles in the
No.
last 20 years. There's no real distinct music or toys or practical effects. Like I said, there's
Right.
CGI instead, or movies. Now it's just, we don't know what we're doing. Back then, every decade is extremely distinct in
Yeah.
a million different ways. So my point would be, if you're a teenager of the 70s, it's so distinct in the 70s with the music, the bell bottoms, everything across the board. I don't think you need to look back to the 60s or 50s, because it's its own thing. And
Yeah.
so I would assume you were so immersed in fitting in with that time, with the styles, with everything. What's the point in looking back? Like it's its own thing.
Yeah.
Now we don't have our own thing, so we have to look back because it's all crap.
Well,
That's my opinion.
you
That's a
watch a
guess.
movie, from 2000. 2000's 24 years ago.
Yeah.
If you watched a movie in 2000 that was 24 years old, that'd be 1976. There'd be a big difference between 1976 and 2000. I can watch a
Massive.
movie. I watch a movie that's like Step Brothers. Step Brothers like 15 years old, right?
2008, I believe.
you look at Will Ferrell, what he looked like then, and you expect him to still look like that. You see him, and he's like this nasty old man. You're like, what the hell happened? I just
Well, he
saw
was
this.
actually about comedy back then too.
Right. Or you look at you look at like the way Nicolas Cage looked like in some movies like in 2000. Now you see him now like that happened. It was just like a little bit ago that he was in this movie. No, it was like 24 years ago. There's no distinction over the last 3 decades whatsoever. It
Right.
like everything still looks the same. A little bit changes here and there, but like you said, I could wear what I'm wearing now, go back to 2000 and fit right in. No problem.
Well,
Easy.
right, right. Like I'd say when I graduated high school in 2002, like there's a little bit of spillover from the 90s for about 2000, maybe 4 or 5,
Mhm.
whatever. But around 2007, 2008, like it's just starting to just tank.
That just
You know,
completely
like
flatlined.
it
Yeah.
just whether it's music, movies, styles, you name it. I think everyone just got lazier. It was more about convenience. It was
Yep.
more about
Yep.
the motivations were clearly different in everything. But I think laziness was a huge part of it. But the I think the shift in culture would also be like there's more of like a victimhood mentality. There's
Oh,
that
absolutely.
lazy,
Absolutely.
slothful mentality. People became less personable over that period of time, I think.
Yep.
Identity politics started to have a huge
Right.
impact. But, and that's not to say stuff wasn't there before, but I'm sorry, but I have to assume this is a guess. I wasn't alive. In the 1970s, if you're like in your bell bottoms and your badass blue leisure suit, you got your fro, you got your hair looking all perfect, and you head out to the roller disco. I don't give a crap if you're a man, you're a woman, you're black, you're white, you're whoever. You're all at the roller disco listening to the freaking Bee Gees, like trying to pick up a date. No one gave a crap about anything. They were
Yep.
just actually having fun, and people were probably more personable. Like you couldn't rely on a dating site or the internet to meet somebody. You had to go out there. You actually had to talk to people.
Yeah.
Um, so I think as far as that goes, that time was way better because people actually had to make themselves presentable. You can't wear your pajamas to the damn roller disco
Right.
if you want to meet
Right.
somebody or wherever they were going. You know what I mean? Like, and then there was like you actually had to wait for your food back then. Like if you go to like like you have Sonic Drive-In now, okay, but back then, they'd have people on roller skates bring out your food. You have to sit there and wait. You have to be personable and the people are wearing uniforms at work. Like just there's even look at there's a video I saw the other day, like the 1930s, New York City. It was a video, all these people walking in New York City. Every guy is in a tie and like a
Yeah.
long jacket
Fedora.
and
Every
yeah,
girl's in a dress.
fedora.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because there was a standard,
Right.
now there's just, oh, I'm just freewheeling. I can just be as lazy and
Yep.
selfish and sloppy and arrogant and non-personable as I want, and I'll just order DoorDash for every meal, and I'm not going to go and do anything, and I don't give a crap if my yard looks like hell or whatever it may be. People gave a damn
Yeah.
from in the 80s and 90s and 70s and especially the 50s, the 40s. I mean, there was a certain standard upheld, you
So
know.
you know what I think the cause of it is? This little thing
Social
right here.
media, well, the internet would be
The
the,
internet. The
again, because
internet.
that slow burn from about
Yeah.
what, 94, 95 when it
90.
came along.
Yeah. Right in there. Once
And then
AOL came
it's
on,
like,
it
okay, this
started.
was helpful and it still
Yeah.
is helpful to an extent, but the introduction of social media in the early 2000s, well, I guess we have to blame Tom
It's
from
Tom.
MySpace.
It's Tom's
Uh,
fault.
yeah, and the less human interaction you had, and you can get away with stuff on the internet. You can say the nastiest things to somebody, and
Right.
there's no repercussions.
You can say something to them that's terrible, but if you said it to them in the face, you get face to face, you get punched in the face.
Well, imagine
Yeah.
if they said that like in the 50s or 60s or 70s to somebody to their face, you get knocked the hell out, and
Get
no one
knocked
cared.
out. Nobody gives a
You
crap.
know, like
Right.
you know, it's kind of like in Back to the Future with Biff. I mean, like
Right. Right.
like,
It's one of those things that it was a good, and it's not just the phone, it's the internet. But
right,
it's one thing that started out as it was going to be helpful and useful, But now it's just been corrupted and perverted to no to the farthest reach as possible.
Right.
Everybody thinks they got to be up in everybody's business. Everybody thinks this. Everybody, you know, you coddle me and accept me, or you know, society has to accept everybody now. Doesn't matter what it is,
And
and
well,
that's the problem.
and even
The,
like accept everything about somebody. Oh, you're lazy and you don't want to work for a living. Okay.
yeah,
Or like just whatever. No matter what the idea is. Okay.
well,
There's no standard. There's no and no work ethic. I mean, look at like the hardworking people. How hardworking people were
mhm,
decades ago.
mhm.
I mean, and when you if you had a house, say, I mean, look at Grandma and Grandpa Picorni, even Grandma and Grandpa Henry, they were so thrilled to have their houses when they got
Right,
them.
right.
I mean, they weren't like, oh, I need a bigger house or I need to move or I need to do this or that. It's like they were just so grateful. I mean, to have that,
Yeah.
and they maintained it and whatever. But there was never like this complaint of, oh, I need
Well, and
8 car garage, I need this, I need that.
it
Like,
wasn't trying to keep up with the Joneses either.
right, right.
That's what Grandma and Grandpa Corney they stayed in that house for what 60 years,
It was, I think, built in
whatever it is.
'59.
Yeah, yeah. Paid
And then Grandma
$14,000
was
for
in
it.
there till 2021 till she passed
Right.
away.
I
So,
know Grandma and Grandpa Henry too. They stayed in their house a long time too, and then they were down in Arizona in the um, winter, which
yeah,
is
their
smart
vacation,
because
right,
Grandpa was playing ball. So it's like,
right,
they weren't all concerned with this too. And I think the biggest point that we need to make here is in the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the thought of God was much different as well too.
yeah,
The God was more prevalent. There's been a
right.
huge falling away from God in the last 30 years, whatever it is, especially the last 4 years.
Well, now we deal with the
You know.
God of self.
Oh, you're right, right. The God itself, which really wasn't. I mean, there probably was a little bit in
Yeah,
those
yeah,
decades, but not like it is now. The God itself's like the number one fastest growing religion, to where it's
right.
like, okay, now it's all about me, and it wasn't like that back then. People cared about each other. It's like a lot of people say. Can you imagine a situation like World War II now?
No.
You'd be
Oh
screwed.
God, no,
You'd be screwed.
no. Well, yeah, I mean, back then you had people lying about their age just so they could get
Go to war.
you know,
Yeah.
and
Not
because
so
both
we could
our
get out of
grandpas
it.
served in the military, and
Right. Right.
Grandpa McCorney was in World War.
Korea.
Grandpa Henry was in World War II, and Grandpa McCorney was in the
Korea.
Korean War,
Yep. Yep.
and
I mean, let's give some context here. My grandfather was drafted by the Cleveland Indians to be a pitcher. Turned it down because he had to go to World War II. How many, can you imagine that happening now? No. These people, they would say, screw it. They'd go AWOL, and they'd go play. And people would say, okay, we'll make it fine for him. It's what he wants to do. It wasn't what
yeah.
was for good, was for the country and everything else. So that's the kind of thing. Same for, our other grandpa. If he wanted to go be a dentist or work on whatever he wanted to do and not go to Korea, you would have done the same thing. And it's like
Well, I
they
mean, yeah,
just
they were just
there's more responsibility, there's more
well,
patriotism.
right. Well, and that also came along like something and again, this is all rooted in lack of God, but
Mm.
the lack of gratitude now
Oh
because
yeah, oh yeah,
our grandparents were extremely grateful people. Their generation was grateful. But nowadays, people are not grateful for jack squat. It's just, and
no,
not all people, of course. We're in America, we're all spoiled. Like, even I have to catch myself every day not being grateful. But man, like
well,
we
yeah,
don't know what hardship really is.
no.
And,
You want
you
to
look
know
at the
hardship?
greatest,
Go to the Middle East. You'll see what
oh,
hardship
exactly,
is if you go
or
to the Middle East
China, where
or
people
China.
are
Right.
willing to die to get a Bible in China. But you look at the greatest generation, our grandparents' generation, they didn't have anything. I mean, a
Right.
lot of them went through the Great Depression.
But
They're
something must have happened with that generation because they had the baby boomers, which
so.
something turned. And the
Here's
baby
what happened.
boomers had the hippies, which something turned again. And then the
Well, what
hippies
happened?
had, you
Here's
know,
what happened. Actually, to answer that is, so the Greatest Generation, they were the the Great Depression generation, right?
Mhm.
So they didn't have anything like material things, especially. So when the baby boomers came along, they essentially spoiled them.
Game too much, right?
So the baby boomers learned that, and then they spoiled the Gen Xers and the millennials. So then you get, and then so they took that, and they, so we progressively each generation gets worse.
Yep.
Then Gen Z comes along, they get spoiled more, and each generation is less about family and goes less against God's order. So they're the daycare generations, and nowadays it's more understandable because how do you afford it?
Right.
But the career generation and buy your kids love generation. Um, oh, we don't tell our kids we love them. We're, oh, I'm just the tough guy in the corner. But each generation gets progressively more selfish, even with their own children, and they're more spoiled. And so now you have kids nowadays that, I mean, their phone raises them basically. But each
And it
generation
all
got progressively worse
right. And
in
it all
that
relates
concept.
back to what we've been talking about. It relates back into the work. It relates back into what's my job? Well, my job is now a movie producer. I don't really want to put in the work to find a good writer and stuff. Let's just make a sequel to Avengers for like the
Yeah.
37th time. I don't really want to make good music. Let's just get Taylor Swift to do it. I don't really want to make a good TV show. Let's just, throw out any piece of crap. People will, what worked in the 80s. Let's see, there was a
Hey, I
Chucky
know.
doll. There was a
Let's
Chucky
make,
doll. Let's make a show about the Chucky doll. Let's do that. That'll be good. And nothing's
or
original.
let's have another Law and Order show. Or
Yeah.
it's funny because my friend Jeff Craig and I joke about this. We've joked about this even since the '90s. Like every time there's a new TV drama, it's either like a cop show or a first responder show or like a
Yeah.
doctor show, and
Yeah.
but every one of them, it takes place in Los Angeles. Oh, then they do a spinoff. It takes place in New York or Chicago, but it's the
Right.
same formula over
Same
and
show.
over and over. And you're just like, these people have no ideas. They literally think that everything takes place in Chicago, LA, or New York.
Right.
They literally only have cops and doctor dramas. Like, oh my
Well,
gosh.
it's
Like,
not
you are
interesting
so
to
bad.
have NCIS Oklahoma City. That's not interesting, man. or
Hey,
cops Evans, Colorado. That's not interesting.
well, exactly, and they make the same show just in a new location with a new
Right.
cast.
Well,
It's like, but
then
it's the same show.
to get the nostalgic point, they'll get some old washed up 80s guy like Mark Harmon or somebody like that. Some guy who hasn't worked in like John Stamos or somebody like that. Because no,
Yeah,
like,
let's
well,
get
we
that
gotta
kid from Saved by the Bell, or
right. Well, I would have, but he died, so we can't get him.
well, no, I was talking about
Oh yeah, the
Zach. He's on a show
Zach,
now,
yeah,
apparently.
yeah, or get somebody like that. Get
You remember when I
Reg.
used to make the joke like after Sixth Sense came out, like I made the joke like oh, we have a movie, but how do we make it good? Oh, I know. Let's get that Sixth Sense kid.
Right,
Like that's their motivation.
right,
Like
right.
if we just get, we don't need
If
a
we just
good
get this
script or
one
anything.
person,
Just
it'll be
yeah,
fine.
get
Yeah,
the hot item at the
right,
moment, and
right.
they've always done that. Like
Yeah.
that's the only way Arnold Schwarzenegger got work, obviously.
Oh
But
yeah, it wasn't for his accent.
nowadays it seems even more. But like yeah, Arnold
Oh man.
Schwarzenegger was a great actor.
Yeah,
What?
yeah.
Like, yeah.
I just think it's hard. It's hard nowadays, and I think that's it's kind of like what they've been saying. Between the stuff that RFK's talking about with the food, with
Uh-huh.
everything, between this stuff where there's always a political agenda in it, between screens being in everybody's face all the time, between there not being no one being held to a standard, it ain't no wonder kids are having a hard time. They kids nowadays are going through a lot harder time than we were. We
Well, and
were we got shoved out to play. We didn't have we watched TV. My kids are playing the original Nintendo. I remember mom and dad getting so pissed off about that thing. They're like, okay, well, they yanked
it
it
was
and they
too
got
much.
rid of it. It
Yeah,
was too much,
yeah.
you know. And that was kind of the beginning of like the screen time. It's like too much to go, but they would
Right.
shove us out to play. Go ride your bikes, go play football, go play
Well,
baseball, go do something else.
that's that's one of the main issues. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because so like they always use the phrase like simpler times. Like yes, absolutely. Because
Mhm.
when we were kids, like oh, we go out we could go rollerblading, we could go play roller hockey, we could
Yep.
go to our friends' houses, we could walk up to Walgreens or Blockbuster Video, we
Yep.
could just play in the yard, we could play football, we could, go on our swing set, uh, ride our bikes, whatever. We could go play in the park behind us, the green belt,
Yep.
play football out there. But every one of those things has something in common, is outside. To your
Well,
point. And
yeah.
we would walk to school like we would, in elementary school. And mom and dad would basically force our hand a lot of time, which good.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's just like you said, like, oh, I need to shut little Johnny up, get the tablet, get
Yeah.
the
Shove it
iPhone.
in his face. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but nothing
Well,
was simpler.
unfortunately, it's a lot more dangerous nowadays too. So that's not always
Well,
a
right,
possibility. The things we
right.
say, can't really, you know, there's no way I'd let my kids walk to school. Their school's like
No,
10 miles away. There's no way I'd let them ride their bikes. I remember the first time I asked mom to go to King Supers with one of my friends. I know it's probably one of the hardest things she's ever had to do, but she let me do it because, it was like the early 90s. I was like 12. There's no way I'd let my kids do that now with all the people,
no,
all the crap that goes on and everything else. Like I don't even let my kids play in the front yard. I don't even let them play in the backyard by themselves because I mean it's even fenced in. No way, man. I don't know who's doing what. I'm gonna go out there with them. You know.
right.
So that it's not all the kids' fault. It's not all the parents' fault. I get
No,
that, but when you go to a restaurant and everybody's, I'll give my kids a phone for a few minutes if they're don't have a coloring sheet or something. But man, if it's in their face for all day, that's not. I mean, I get to the point. Dan's like this too because we both work in IT. I get to the point where my eyes start hurting because I look at a screen so damn much or throughout the course of a week, and it's like I get to the point where I'm playing winter softball right now just to get away from the damn screens and have something else to do because we're
yeah,
in front of screens so freaking much. You know.
everything's a screen.
Yeah. So. All right.
Everything.
Well, we'll say the '80s is better than now, but there are some caveats that maybe I didn't think of when I came up with this idea. So good job. Way
No,
to
but
be
that's
biased.
why you
Way to be
discuss the.
non-biased.
Well, you know, I, I think one of the main things for anybody is if they had a decent childhood, at least decent or a good or great childhood, is when you're a kid, you're ignorant and naive to the world, and so
Yeah.
you have a true like God's idea of like childlike. You know, he talks about childlike faith, but where you have childlike joy, like it's just as you get older and you become more aware of things and how things work and you suffer hardship, like that true childlike
Yeah.
joy, like on Christmas Eve or on your birthday or whatever it may be, it's extraordinarily hard to come by. You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean? Because you're
Well,
aware,
you're aware.
you don't
Yeah.
have that innocent, naive, way about you. And so, and I think that's God's natural order, of course. We're supposed to be more aware, but I think that's why people tend to look back and be like, oh, that was so nice. And I think
Yeah.
that's a good chunk of why they miss it.
I think you get
Because,
rose-colored glasses too, though, because
yeah,
you remember those things, but you know some points that we've made, it's like it wasn't perfect. It wasn't a perfect time where there was no problems, and it was just this wonderful little '80s land where there was no problems. We were getting threatened
right,
by Russia and everything else, and it's like I think you probably, like you said, everybody wants to look back when they were a kid because it was so much easier. I tell my kids not to grow up all the time because being an adult's not the most fun thing in the world.
it
It's
really
not
isn't.
the easiest thing. It's not the easiest thing to pay bills and to deal with the stuff you got to deal with and worry about your kids and worry about the world all the time and and do all that stuff. So I think that's why people look back on it so much. I think the older I get, the more I look back on it too.
Well, sure. And yeah, because also at that time, you have no idea or understanding of the concept of like gratitude and enjoying it
Right.
as it's happening because you're
Right.
a kid. you
Well,
know?
and you don't want to live there too. You should still have gratitude and
Right.
enjoy the spot you're in, the present day that you're in,
Yeah.
because you don't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
let that go by because it could be done just like that. So it's like,
Well, exactly. Yeah. Living in the
if that
past isn't good. You can appreciate it, but don't live in it.
that stupid son of a bitch Biden keeps messing with Russia, we're all going to be vaporized soon. So you
Well, you
know,
won't even know it happens. So
right, just flash.
you're 1 second, gone the next.
Right, right. So, all right. Well, let's wrap it up. You get to come up with an idea for next week.
Oh, good. I can do that.
Cool. So whatever Dan comes up with is what we're going to talk about next week.
All right. Yeah, I think
It's
I
all
can
on
come up
you.
with something.
I'm not going to do it this week. It's all
All
on
right.
you.
All right. Can
So
do that.
just,
Huh.
yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. If you did, send us a like. Stop sending the dislikes. It's not very nice of you guys to give us so much dislikes on these. There's a lot of them. And it's like,
Well, obviously, it's
you're not
because
on
of
here
the
doing it. What are you disliking it for? You can do better, go do it. Dislike it. I don't understand that. What? Why does YouTube have the? Okay, YouTube. I got a question. Not like you're gonna answer. Why do you have the dislike button? What's the point of
So
that?
you know why? So people can feel like they're contributing or like they're somehow swaying society or getting their view across.
I actually don't think it's even that. I think it's so YouTube doesn't have to play certain things because, like, well, nobody's gonna like it anyway, so we're not gonna play it because look at all the dislikes on it.
But is
That's how
is a
YouTube works.
dislike gonna change somebody's mind? I mean, it's just such a
Oh, it
mute.
will. Oh, yeah, it will. It will. Yeah, if the right person dislikes the Yukon Phil
Flipped our
video,
world upside
it's
down.
done.
Suddenly
It's
we're
over.
just going to
Well,
think and act just like the
but
dislike
that's
people.
another good point. Like, you know how when you were a kid, if somebody told you they didn't like you, it hurt your feelings, right? Now, somebody hits the dislike, world's over.
Cool. Dislike it all you want. Yippee.
It's a good thing I got thick skin. I don't care if y'all don't like it. Don't
Well, what
watch
is it
this.
even?
That's
I mean, okay.
that,
Tommy L in Alabama didn't like it. Okay. And I
well,
better sleep, you know.
Tommy L, you go get a YouTube channel and you do it better than man. You do
Well,
you, boo.
no, it's easier to be a critic and just criticize everyone else and never
Right.
criticize themselves or any of their own thoughts or own behaviors. They took all the mirrors in their house down just for that reason. You don't have to look into it. Even Bill Maher said, "Hey, look in the mirror," you know.
Well, they were giving themselves so many dislikes, they figure if they don't have to look at themselves, I don't have to give a dislike.
Hey, I changed the world. Oh, really? What'd you do? I disliked the video. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, I've disliked my fair share too, but it doesn't
I
mean
don't
anything.
know. I don't know. I've disliked comments because there's a lot of dumb comments, but I don't think I've ever disliked a video. I think as a YouTube creator, it's like, kind of blasphemy to dislike somebody who's put time and effort into something.
Well, that's
Even
true.
if it's garbage, it still won't. I just won't give it a like. I'll just be neutral. I won't give it a dislike because I know the person still spent time on it and shit. It's like whatever. All right. We'll see you guys next
Yeah.
week.
All right.
Bye.